Mark, Ashley, great to see you guys. Thanks for joining me for this conversation on Perko's podcast. Mark, it was almost a year ago now that you connected with me about the whole COVID situation and how Australians were responding to it. You guys' research, you put out some great content on how Australians were responding to the global pandemic. And for those listeners that didn't hear that conversation, episode 5, go back and check that out. Ashley, we connected recently and a few months ago now when you released the great book, Work Wellbeing, which, by the way, I recommend to every workplace leader as almost a textbook on how to lead well in the workplace. So for listeners, that was episode 12. How are you guys doing? And how have things changed with the pandemic and coming out of that at McCrindle? What have been the changes for you guys on a personal level, but also as an organization? I'd love to learn. I'm curious.
Yeah, it's been an interesting 18 months for us. So, I mean, Mark and I are used to going out and speaking at conferences, and I always start with that big slide of 2020 and what a wild ride it was for everyone. And I think for us, a big part of what Mark and I do here and other members of our team is to go out and speak at conferences, and share the research and the insights. And of course, we weren't allowed to have any conferences or do any of that. So last year looked very different for us, but we thought, well, what can we do instead? So we've released 2 books in the last 18 months, Mark and I, which is
good.
Been very busy, a busy time for us. Like many other organizations, we worked from home for a few months and we're all back in the office now, which we love. We love our team and it's been a delight to be back. And then live events are kind of back up and running as well. So that's been really exciting. Mark and I have been interstate a few times this year, which we used to do on the regular. And now it's a really novel, exciting thing again. So that's fun. And I think 2020 as well, I would often share with people and Mark, you might agree, even my time at McCrindle, I feel like last year we ran more research than we've ever done before, just because so much of our society and the foundations on which it's built were changing about how we work and how we do community and how we do church. So yeah, more research than ever before. So yeah, it's been an exciting year and a lot going on.
Yeah. And you guys are starting to get back out now as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Things opening up, which is exciting. I mean, really has just shown how blessed we've been here in Australia to be at this position. And so, we're grabbing onto those opportunities. And the research for us, it is an honor to have been conducting national research in a pandemic, just to track how Australians have been going. And what's remarkable is the resilience of Australians, but also let's not overlook how tough 2020 was. 57% of Australians in our study said that 2020 was the most difficult year of their life.
Wow.
And it led to changes. 47% of Australians said that they have thought more about the meaning of life since COVID. A similar proportion said they have thought more about their own mortality because of COVID. And so Australians have been reprioritizing, they've been reflective. Aussies aren't given much to reflecting on life. We just sort of get on and get it done. Yeah. It's been the no worries culture. But this has rattled Australians, and I think for great reasons and great outcomes. It has caused a reprioritizing, a revaluing, a slowdown, a reflection. And I think it's just a great time for Australians who of faith and who can give some input and insight into the lives of Australians to be having these conversations at such a time like this.
Yeah. I love, Mark, I've heard you say this so many times, that we really are wanting to know the times we're living in and understand the days that we're living in so that we can lead and live in a way that is most wise. And so what a time to be understanding the days we're living in such unique days. You guys having the ability to research at such a unique time in history that I think I've even read it from you guys that people will look back on, and this will be a time that was in the history books as a significant mile marker, not just for Australians, but for the entire world, with a worldwide global experience at the same time that's kind of unusual for humanity to have experienced. So I think it's fascinating. And I love the work that you guys are doing. So grateful that you took the time, not just to do the research, but to get out a couple of books and get the content out in whatever, platforms you could possibly do it. So thank you guys for doing that. I do want to, I want to turn our attention in the conversation to the new book By the way, for those that are watching the podcast on YouTube, I have it in my hands. You can find it in bookstores all over Australia, Amazon.com as well. Grab a copy of Generation Alpha. You guys co-wrote this, but not just the two of you like you've done with previous books like Work Wellbeing and so on. You've added a third person, Sam Buckerfield. Can you introduce us to Sam and introduce us to kind of the roles that you guys played, the three of you, as you worked on the project together? I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, so we did engage Sam, and he is sort of a friend of McCrindle. He was a friend of someone who worked here, a really great Christian guy. So Mark met with him early on in the process, and the book's been in the works for over 18 months, maybe even 2 years. And so originally I wasn't involved. It was just Mark and Sam, because Mark is a phenomenally busy person. So we thought, let's engage someone to help get these thoughts down, finesse the wording, bring the concepts and the vision that Mark has to life, who's got that expertise. So we engaged Sam. And then I guess over time, particularly in last year, just with everything changing, Mark thought, and Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, to bring me into the process. So we'd already co-authored a book together by this point. So I assume that went well from your perspective, Mark. And I think, yeah, to help someone, to have another author from someone at McCrindle, I think was really helpful. Mark being out and about so much, doing so many things and a really busy schedule, just having a third person to do all of that. And so much of what underpins this book is research-based. So I was also able to help with some surveys and focus groups. And Sam and I actually had the privilege of going to a conference last year in the United States. And when I say that, everyone's like, when did you go to the United States?
Yeah,
2020. So February, like at the beginning of Feb, when coronavirus was like a little tiny whisper. I remember having masks in my bag, even just at the thought of it. But yeah, so we were able to go, and we conducted a whole bunch of interviews with people, and I ran a focus group over there, and my husband was like my research assistant because he was with me. So
good.
Yeah, it's been a co-writing group, which has been really great because Sam's just added so much depth and insight, and his storytelling ability has been fantastic for us to utilize.
Yeah. As I read through the book, you can tell there's a storyteller behind the research coming through, and it's so well written, easy to read, great content, but easy to consume, not difficult. And so I love the way you guys have kind of paired up the storytelling and the research database, coming through in both ways. I think it's fantastic. So, hey, as you guys know, the theme of the podcast is really simple. We want to help leaders reach their goal without losing their souls. And so I would love to ask you some questions about the book related to kind of a variety of different leadership roles, from like parents, teachers, employers, community and faith-based leaders. So really to gain an understanding, first of all, of kind of the highlight real characteristics of this generation Alpha. And then if you would, Mark, I'd love for you to maybe tell the story a little bit too of how you came up with the name for this generation as you share some of their high-level characteristics.
Sure. Well, it's exciting to have written a book about this emerging generation, the very latest generation. And as you alluded, Perko, I think that it's important to get an understanding of the context in which we're operating. And as leaders, we tend to look in the mirror, as it were, a bit about our organization internally, do this gaze. But we need to also look out the window at the changing times, at the context. And as we look out the window, we see changing generations, we see emerging cohorts. And we say that, the best leaders are focused not on the next program, but the next generation. They have that generation to generation mindset. And so I'm sure we know Generation X, and then we went to Generation Y and Generation Z, and we found ourselves at the end of the alphabet, but the generations just keep coming. And there's a whole generation born from 2010. These generations span 15 years now, so if we think about Generation Y, sometimes called the millennials, 1980 to 1994, they were born. Generation Z, 1995 to 2009. So from 2010, a new generation, no letters left on the alphabet. We didn't want to go back to A because it's not going back to the start. This is the first generation fully born in the 21st century. This is the first generation truly born global, truly born digital, devices in their hands from the youngest age. And social media and the connectivity and the visual consumption of of information and the social influence that drives them. And so it's a whole new terrain, a whole new context, a whole new era. So we picked up on the scientific naming, moving to the Greek alphabet. So Generation Alpha is the term we put forward as the moniker. It seems to have stuck. And so that's who we're talking about. They will be the largest generation in history, just
Wow.
because the birth numbers are higher now than ever before.
Yeah.
A global cohort that'll end up with more than 2 billion in their number by the time they're all fully born. So pretty sizable. 6,000 of them born in Australia every week. So fast growing here locally as well. And therefore, to understand this emerging generation, because of their size, because of their influence, because of their unique times, is important. I mean, this generation has been in their formative years in COVID. And the age at which you're exposed to a big global event like that, or a new technology or a new era, does determine how embedded it becomes in your lifestyle and your psyche. So this generation will even be shaped more profoundly by COVID than the rest of us. So for all of those reasons, we wanted to dig deeply into them and understand them, and that's who they are. That's the label that they've been given, and something of what's shaping them so far.
Yeah. It's interesting that some of the key characteristics are they're a global generation. And primarily, I would say technology is really allowing for that global characteristic. And yet the pandemic has brought a unique global experience, not just the technology, but the pandemic, that no matter where they go in the world for the rest of their lifetime, they will always have a common experience, a common ground experience with other people from around the world. I think that's very interesting for a global generation to have something beyond technology that kind of unites them together. Hey, I picked up, as I'm reading through the book, I actually highlighted the word modeling multiple times throughout the book. And I'm assuming that was on purpose, that was intentional. But it seems like modeling is a key theme of leading this generation alpha. I would love if you could explain, what do you mean by that? And then what are some crucial areas that leaders, no matter what their role is, parent, teacher, faith-based leader, whatever their role is, employer, what are some crucial things that this generation specifically is going to need us to lead in by modeling to them?
Absolutely. It's going to be crucial. And especially because we're talking about children. We're talking about this current generation who will be known hopefully forevermore as Generation Alpha, but currently they're aged 11 years and under. And I think when we were surveying parents and asking questions of education professionals and leaders, it was very much this generation are like sponges. And I'm sure many parents would identify with that when you exhibit a certain behavior or you do something in front of a child and then they replicate that. So I think what we wanted to get across in the book is how important it is if we are teaching even principles or things that we want to instill in this next generation, we need to model that ourselves, which, as you kind of alluded to, Perko, is the role of a leader in any context, I think, because people we know just as human beings look to leaders for the accepted behaviors and what's normal and how to do things. And that's kind of how organizational leaders set the culture of an organization, which is what we wrote a lot about in our previous book. But I think in families and places where these Generation Alpha kids are, it's really about modeling. And I think one of the key defining traits that you picked up on for this generation is that they're very technology based and really formed in a time of great change around technology. And so one really key example that just kept coming up in the research that we conducted was all around modeling behavior with screens. And I think it's interesting, a lot of people, and even the interviews we've been doing with radio lately, everyone loves to talk about the intergenerational warfare and how every older generation loves to sort of talk about the young people like, oh, they're so tech savvy and oh, they're so lazy. And I just think, but this is the world that they're being shaped in, that was created for them by older generations. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to explore this world that they're being shaped in. And with technology and screens, I think that really comes down to us modeling the behavior that we want to see with them. If we're telling them to get off screens, but we're always on our screens, then that can be really hard for them to sort of discern how to do that. So I think that's one area that we really see modeling to be really important.
Yeah. Actually, I want to piggyback off this whole screen thing, because I was having a conversation with a pastor friend of mine who leads a significant sized church up on the Sunshine Coast of Australia and Queensland, but he also has two children that are Generation Alpha. And he said, as I was sharing with him about the book and about the podcast coming up and the conversation I was going to have with you, I said, what would you love to ask Mark and Ashley? And he said, I've got one question I want to know. This is the screen age. This group of people are on screens. In fact, you guys have a chapter in the book entitled The Great Screen Age, chapter 4. He said, ask them, is resistance futile? So I'll give you some context. He and his wife have watched other parents parenting and watched as toddlers, growing up on devices and constantly on screens. And they made the decision they didn't want that to be their parenting style. They didn't want to just hand a kid an iPhone or hand the kid an iPad. So can you answer, first of all, just for my friend who will be listening to the podcast, is resistance futile? I think it's a question, though, many parents are asking. And then answering that question, what does it look like to practice that healthy modeling? I'm fascinated by what you guys would recommend.
Well, great question. And it is one of the most asked questions that we get. And no, resistance is not futile. In fact, some level of resistance or boundaries or controls are essential because we're talking about children in their formative years. And the whole purpose of raising a child, of parenting, is to move them from dependence, where we have to set boundaries and guide them, to independence, where they have made up their own and instill their own behavioral mechanisms and values and can live it independently. So in the formative and dependency years, we do need those resistance strategies. We wrote in the book, a little 4-step toolkit that might help, DCBA, and the D stands for delay the access to the device. There's no reason for a 6-year-old to have their own mobile phone. Maybe depending on the circumstances at 10 or 11, they need that because they've got some after school activities or whatever. But as much as we can delay the access, the better. And I would say, if you can delay it till the teenage years, their own device, that's a great thing. By all means, have access to devices because they're learning incredible skills. A lot of their education is through the devices now. It is the encyclopedia, it is the teaching tool, it is the coaching channel. So they need access. But if it's our device that we hand to them, they use and then hand back, or if they've got their own iPad or whatever, fine, but we restrain the use of it to set hours, that's going to help. And that's the D for delay. The C was communicate the values. So back to the modeling point, parents have to model this and have to teach the values of what we value, what's appropriate, what we turn our eyes to, and what we don't. And if the children can understand that, because they need that direction, they don't have that themselves, that's great. After the C for communicate, the B is behavioral strategies. Let's equip them with some strategies so that they can monitor their own behaviors. There is an addictive nature to these screens. We know that. We see our children or others, and the more they have access to, more the addiction plays through with the gaming, with the interaction, with the social media. As adults, we struggle to limit our time. We did a survey last year. We found that most Australians access their smartphone within the last 4 minutes of going to bed. And most Australians access it within the first 4 minutes of waking up. So it's there on the bedside. It's the last thing we do. It's the first thing we do. That comes close to the definition of addiction to me, And if we as adults are having challenges, how much more the kids? So let's give them behavioral strategies, get them when they feel the impulse for the device to play some activities outside, other moderating behaviors. And then the A stands for accountability. We do need to set some boundaries, have some consequences if they overstep those, and really keep some accountability there. It might be friending them on social media. It might be looking through the feed or the use. It might be setting some time frames around when they access it and ensuring they stick to that. Now, over time, they'll move to independence and they'll manage that themselves. But that's our little strategy. It seems to be working well. I've modeled it, tried it with my kids, and I think we do need some strategies. Otherwise, the technology will really not just define their life, but it will really be the dominating principle of their life. And we want it to be a tool and not really become their life. So some moderation is required.
Okay, so Mark, that strategy in and of itself, worth the time spent in this conversation for parents, I think. Fantastic. Have you noticed, Ashley, I would love to hear from your perspective, because you've got some nieces and things in your world like that are in this generation alpha. Have you seen some of this play out, and what's been your experience with the strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 6 nieces and nephews, and they're all Gen Alphas. So the youngest ranges from only a few months old to 7. And it's really interesting. Definitely, I think they're probably a little bit more resistant to technology and screens than even some of my other friends I'm the youngest of my siblings, so like who have children on my husband's side. So I feel like my friends particularly are introducing screens a little bit more, but I've definitely seen that delay and limit. And I guess what I've also found to be my sibling and siblings-in-law's experience and parents' experience, which was mirrored in the research we conducted, is parents really finding a tension between technology, particularly. So we looked at these tensions, and I love that word because it sort of, I think, depicts the complexity that people are going through, particularly as kids age and they go through different life stages and brain development, which we talk about in the book. But parents want to give their kids independence, but they also want to keep them safe. They want to expose them to the real world, but they also want to shelter them and protect them. And they want their kids to be tech savvy because they know that's going to be a world they enter into, but they want them to develop skills that come from, things that are off-screen activities and getting out in nature and things like that. So I think that's the changing times that parents today are navigating. And I see that in the parents that I know. And I think they're doing some great things in terms of allowing technology to be in the home, but moderating that and teaching those values and just being open and communicating, going, this is why we don't have screen time at the table, or this is why we're going to go out camping this weekend and turn everything off. So I think they're doing some great work for the parents that I know.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you've used a term in the book that I thought was excellent, digital intelligence. Is this what you're talking about? Can you unpack that concept and maybe some practical ways that Gen Alpha can build this digital intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do try throughout the book to not just say, these are the way that this is the way the world's changing, and then sort of mic drop and walk away. We do try and give lots of practical tips and elements. And yeah, one of those is around digital intelligence and how parents and leaders and aunties and uncles can help instill this digital intelligence in these children, because we don't want them to just be tech savvy. We want them to be critical thinkers of the content that they engage with, and building resilience online and things like that. So some of the tips we have around building digital intelligence is making sure that kids understand that even when they're acting online or interacting online, it's about giving respect to other people that they might be engaging with or those platforms. It's about also, I think, looking for ways to teach these kids about empathy. And that's obviously a really key aspect of, I think, developing those interpersonal skills, is understanding different people's perspectives and what they're saying online or what they're engaging with online. A next one that's really important, I think, is to encourage skepticism. And I think all of us need to do that. And we're all constantly on that learning curve as technology becomes more integrated into our lives, even as adults, is to go, okay, is what I'm reading true? Is this credible? Encouraging that skepticism and that critical thinking. The promote and model balance is always a key one and can be challenging for us as parents and leaders and adults. As Mark said, many of us are engaging with these devices as well on a regular basis. And also just to look for those moments, and I'm sure many parents would agree with this, to just find those moments where you can teach kids about what's going on and how the world's changing. And if there's an example of something that's happened online or something that's happened to you, perhaps, sharing what's appropriate with them and finding the lessons so that they can, again, like Mark said, as they get older, take those into their life as they move into teens and tweens and adults.
Yeah, I love that teachable moments concept that you just talked about, Ashley. It's such a great parenting tip. You're going to make a great parent, by the way, with all this research. I think one day, and you're probably already mentoring and parenting those nieces and nephews really well as you spend so much time with them as well. So I grew up actually not far from your offices. I grew up Baulkham Hills area, and I fondly remember finishing school, riding my bike home. When we'd get home, we'd have a quick snack, some afternoon tea or something, and we were right back outside playing cricket, rugby league or soccer or whatever the sporting season was at that time of the year. And we were basically doing that for hours until it got dark and we couldn't see the ball anymore. Whatever ball it was we were playing with, it got too dangerous to bowl a cricket ball at somebody because they couldn't see it. So we'd then go inside and have dinner. You talk about in the book that that's not the norm anymore. In fact, you identified this concept of the nature deficit disorder. I would love for you guys, I'm intrigued. What's the disorder and how can parents help to combat this disorder with the fundamental challenges that this generation is facing with technology and all the things that are going on in the world today?
Well, that's right. I mean, technology is where they're spending the bulk of their time. 70% of the discretionary time of children, that is outside of the school or any chores that they do, is spent on screens.
Wow.
So that's their go-to. That's their entertainment. That's their recreation. That's their social time. Having friends over, time with friends, it's through the technology. And the downside of that is that they're just not getting outdoors as much. Richard Louv was an American writer, and he coined this term nature deficit disorder. We write a bit about it in the book. He wrote a book called Last Child in the Forest, with this sad vision that could we get to the point where kids just don't go into the woods, or in his language, or we'd say the bush,
yes,
the parks, the playgrounds anymore. And there is a sense of that. I mean, we've got a population that's growing up more in apartment living. We don't feel the sense of the safety that previous generations felt. Children don't have that same freedom to have that free play or unstructured play. We perhaps overly cocoon our kids. They don't walk to school or ride the bike to school. We drop them off. And we understand the reasons for that, and that parents have a high emphasis on safety and protection, of course, important. But we also want our kids to be holistically developed. We want our kids to have a confidence when they're outdoors. And if children, are scared of going out or can't climb a tree or feel worried about bugs, I mean, this is Australia. We're going to have troubles in our future. This is the land of bush and bugs. And if we don't know how to light a campfire, or feel uncomfortable if we've got to camp out, that's a problem. And I'm sure we all know through our experience, probably some of our best times of whether it be prayer or reflection or just processing things happened when we're in creation. We go for a walk outdoors and we feel confident and comfortable there. It's God's creation. We see his handiwork, his beauty, and his animals. And I think there is a great value in that, and a problem if we've got kids who don't have that outdoors literacy, if you like, who are confident on screens but unconfident in the real world. And the other factor here is their health and their lifestyle. And of course, screens can create a sedentary lifestyle. Now, we need them to have those digital skills, and that's fantastic. But the future is going to need them to not just have technology skills, because we can outsource that to computers and automation. What they're going to need is the ability to think creatively, to solve problems, to understand complexity, to relate well to people. And that can happen when they interact in the real world, not just through screens, and when they feel confident in getting outdoors and reflecting, not just having every spare moment spent on a device.
Yeah. So Mark, you just listed off a bunch of skills that you can't outsource. We can outsource, like you said, robotics, automation, the computer stuff, but you then listed a set of skills. Let's talk to educators that are listening to the podcast for a moment. You've identified this list of skills and you've kind of given them a category I understand as transferable skills. Can you explain, obviously the need is going to be huge for these skills because we can't outsource them, but explain why it's so crucial for this generation specifically. And then can you maybe give some advice to educators? How are we going to teach these skills in the classroom setting? When they get to school, how are we actually going to teach these transferable skills that are going to be so crucial?
Yeah, we do talk a lot about transferable skills in the book, and when we speak to educators and when we do a lot of or conduct a lot of research for the education sector, it's something we've been exploring and researching for a number of years. And so I think traditionally education's been really focused on what we call the foundational literacies. So it sort of describes how kids or students apply core skills to everyday tasks. So we're talking about traditional literacy and numeracy, financial literacy even, and those things are still really important. But what we're seeing is now a greater appreciation for also these competencies. So how students approach complex tasks, things like critical thinking and the ability to problem solve. Are we able to be creative and find new ways of thinking about problems or new solutions, communication skills, and even the ability to collaborate and work with other people. And then what we also believe is really important is a third element, which is the character quality of someone. And that's effectively how students approach this changing environment, which is going to be so crucial for Generation Alpha because their whole world is changing. And again, if anyone doubted that, we just experienced 2020. So I think we're all admitting that the world is changing and the times are changing. And that's the ability to be curious and take initiative, to have persistence or grit, to be adaptable, effectively to have resilience, which we all know now, I think that we really do need. And I guess for us, we know that this generation are going to be working in more machine-assisted workplaces. The future of work is changing. They're going to have, we predict, 18 jobs across 6 careers. So they're going to change jobs more frequently because the average tenure of staying in a role is shorter. And so that's where I think it's not just a career for life anymore, but it's skills for life. And it's skills that they can take in different contexts and different environments and different industries. And that's how we believe kids today can be future-proofed. And I think what Mark was sharing as well is around the fact that a lot of this we learn at school. We also learn in the playground. We learn when we get opportunities to lead groups of people or be in sporting teams, or especially I think in church, we learn so many of these skills in a church environment, which is amazing for these kids, I think. And so, yeah, it's really about, I think, in more machine-assisted workplaces, those skills that actually make us uniquely human, that we actually can't outsource to machines. If we can focus on developing those things in Generation Alpha, then we can equip them in good stead for a very rapidly changing world and a changing future for them.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about the workplace now and what these skills are going to help this generation be able to do in the workplace. There was a quote that literally jumped off the page at me from the chapter on the future of work. And it said this. I was shocked by this. You said 65% of children entering primary school today, or elementary school for those listening from the Northern Hemisphere, entering school today will end up working job types that don't yet exist. I then read this weekend in the Australian newspaper, the Weekend newspaper, in the magazine, there was a quote about the future of work. And the writer said this: I wonder what new businesses, new careers, new pathways to a better quality of life lie ahead for the next generation of workers, armed with little more than their youthful energy, their curiosity, and a willingness to learn and master whatever is required. So we're talking about brand new roles, brand new jobs, roles, and employment that doesn't even exist today. So walk us through the shift that is exciting, but to be honest with you, it's also terrifying to think about the fact that 65% of these people will be working jobs that we don't even know about. What are the types of jobs that we can expect to be coming in the future? And how can a business leader begin to prepare for this shift even today as they think about the future?
Yeah, amazing statistic, and that's from the World Economic Forum, who ran a whole paper on that. And so that really is, evidenced. I mean, we can look at that today. When you were growing up as a primary age youngster in the hills, Perko, I'm sure you didn't think one day you'd be a podcast host and producer, a new job title that has emerged. Now in those very same hills district of Sydney, we've got driverless trains operating with the Sydney Metro. You've got robotics technicians employed there. You've got automated warehouses where people are using those technology skills in these new peopleless places. We've got cybersecurity professionals and AI technicians and coding and robotics classes in schools. I mean, it's just a whole new world. And so in the future, that trend will continue where there'll be jobs of 2030 that we don't yet see, whole jobs emerging around blockchain and around some of these quantum computing. And so that trend will continue. So what do we do about it? Well, I think what we need to be is lifelong learners. We need to be able to and be prepared to upskill and retrain as we go, not just get more degrees, but the micro credentials. We've got to future-proof ourselves by being aware of the context and the changes. We've got to particularly invest in those transferable skills we were just discussing, because anything that can be automated will be. Anything that we can outsource to a computer, we'll be doing that. But what computers can't do is the creative thinking, the people side of it, the innovation, the adaptation, the understanding complexity and making decisions in that. All of those are human skills. So if we can focus on the human, continue our upskilling, be lifelong learners, and be prepared to adapt, that's going to be key. And even the type of employment young people will work in the future will change. The majority of them will work not just for employers, but for themselves at points in their career. They'll be self-employed, small business operators, perhaps gig economy workers. That's changing the type of employment. It's changing the type of work. And of course, where we work is changing in this work from home environment. And now we've decoupled work from location, so we can work from home or the cafe or the co-working space. It means that people here can hold down jobs that might be overseas and vice versa. It's that sort of world. It's that extent of change. And we have done research on this, and our metrics on it is that a school leaver today will have 18 separate jobs across 6 separate careers. That's a lot of change.
Yes.
So what that means is adaptation, resilience, the ability to respond to the changes and think creatively to remain ever relevant in this time of massive change.
Yeah. So we're talking about this idea of work, and it's changing rapidly, and it's going to look vastly different in the future. Talk to us, Ashley, about leading Generation Alpha in the workplace. In fact, you have an entire section of the book that dives into this, and I found it interesting that you've kind of leaned into some of the content that you shared in your book, Work Wellbeing. And I loved the 3 E's that you guys have developed for leaders to focus on. If you're a leader that's leading this generation and listening to this conversation, I would love for you just to unpack this idea of equipping, encouraging, and entrusting Generation Alpha, and why those 3 E's are going to be so important to leaders in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, we have leaned on some of the content from Work Wellbeing here and the 3 E's, which we love and we believe are pretty timeless in terms of, and I think kind of cross-disciplinary, that we can talk about them in the role of a leader in a workplace leading adults. We can talk about the role of these even with leading children. And I think it's relevant for parents. It's relevant for anybody who is engaging with this generation. So the first part is, that encouragement. And I reflect on my own life and my own experience as a child and as a teenager. And it was the belief in me from other people, especially I think as a teacher. I remember some great teachers when they would speak words of encouragement or words of life. And I think for Christians, so many of us have received that, and we know the importance of words in building up and speaking life into people. So when we can do that for Generation Alpha, that's fantastic, particularly as they're learning and developing their own skills and what they like and their interests. But of course, we don't just want to bolster them so much that they think they're so amazing that nothing's ever going to go wrong in their life. We want to give them, equip them with those skills. Mark talked about transferable skills, and for a lifelong career, that idea that we want to equip them with technology skills, but also interpersonal skills and relationship skills and the ability to have empathy. So all those things that bring a well-rounded child into the adult world and that holistic approach to life. But then we also want to entrust them. And I think this is key for giving Generation Alpha opportunities, even in the home. And we're already seeing that. We ask a lot of parents, how influential are your kids in the household purchasing decisions on what you watch? And a lot of parents said, well, they're very influential. This generation is speaking up. They're not just a generation to sort of sit and be dictated to. They're more creative. They're co-creating on these platforms. And I think that's going to be setting them up for a great life of creativity and things like that, solving new problems that we're going to encounter or problems that already exist today. So the more we can do that and give them opportunities. And I think when we do that as human beings, when we're challenged in a safe environment, particularly when we're talking about kids, when we give them opportunities to contribute and also teach them about failure. and teach them about how to respond to failure. I know for my, I've been playing Monopoly Deal with my nephew Noah, and I love watching him work out this whole losing thing. And it looks like he's about to chuck a tantrum, but then he doesn't, and we're able to play again. I say, well, we can play another game. And so you can see the clock sort of ticking in his head and opportunities for him to engage with that idea. And I think that's really key for all of us, even in workplaces, and how much greater if we can start with this young generation to equip them with the ability to fail and to not fear failure, so that they can bring new ideas and they're not too scared of that. Because that leads to resilience, that leads to innovation. That's going to be really important for them as they grow up.
Yeah. I love, Ashley, you talked about entrusting this generation with decision making. You specifically talked about what are we going to watch? What are we going to purchase? Even purchasing decisions. So I've noticed, even in my own lifetime, significant shifts in how we do shopping. So as a kid, my mom would give me some money, send me to the store on my bike to pick up milk and, whatever else it is that was needed. And nowadays, like, we have buttons that we press in the house that let Amazon know we need more dishwashing liquid. And it just shows up, from Amazon Prime a couple of days later or whatever. So talk to us about what are the shifts going to be in the future when it comes to shopping. You talk about in the book an idea of the invisible store. I would love to know, what are you guys predicting when it comes to shopping for Generation Alpha in the future? I feel like we're living in the Jetsons right now, but you're thinking we're going to be living in the Jetsons even more so in the future. So talk to us about shopping and what's that going to look like for this generation?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a whole new world. And we're already experiencing that invisible store. And even for 2020, when many of us maybe liked going and picking out our fruit when we couldn't do that, or we wanted to stay home, we kind of got the online shopping, and now the world's adjusted to that. What maybe many of us had resistance to, that's now shifted. And I think about this generation and what the next decade or 2 decades is going to entail. And I think for many of us, it is going to be that increased personalization, increased use of technology to meet our needs before we even know that they're needs. It's almost like you were mentioning, Perko, in terms of, devices and things like that in the home, built into our homes, recognizing when we're out of things, when we need to reorder something. That predictive analytics that we're already starting to see in our Netflix playlist and our Spotify playlists becoming integrated seamlessly into the shopping experience for this generation, which we think is going to be fantastic. It sounds, like you said, very futuristic, very Jetsons, but we know that technology is at its best when it serves us and we don't serve it, but also when it creates more time for us. It creates greater simplicity. And that's what a lot of parents even said with Generation Alpha today. They're like, even in the library, we had to go and look through encyclopedias just to find things, whereas this generation can Google things and do things online, and that's creating more time for family time or more time for other creative hobbies or pursuits. So I think that's really going to be translated to the future of shopping as well, which is, again, hard to think about in some ways, hard to conceptualize, but it'll be really exciting, I think, future for this generation as well in terms of how they'll shop.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ashley, primarily because I have 2 teenage young adult sons who consume, I'm not kidding, about 5 to 7 3-liter bottles of milk a week. So if the predictive analytics can just go ahead and deliver a cow to my front door every day for us, that would be super helpful, rather than having to remember to get yet another 3-liter bottle of milk from Coles or wherever it is we get it from. So I'm super excited about the future of shopping. That's actually one of the things that I'm really looking forward to, is the invisible store and the idea of learning the patterns that we have needs of and being able to fulfill those needs as we have them. So, hey, you guys have done over the years, in my opinion, I think the best job of research when it comes to faith in Australia. And as you know, so many of the people that listen to the podcast are faith-based leaders, whether it's in a for-profit or a church setting or a not-for-profit. We've noticed now for several years a steady decline in an interest of things of faith and at least church engagement. I wouldn't say that we necessarily have seen a decline in interest of faith, because I think people are still interested in faith, even if they're not interested in church engagement. Could you talk to the faith leaders that are listening, especially those that are leading children and maybe youth ministry, like children's ministers, youth ministers, how would you advise them on how to reach this new generation, Generation Alpha, and connect things of faith and spirituality to this generation? What would be your advice to them?
My perspective on that is, firstly, let's understand the reality of what's happening here. And yes, it's true that there's less connection with institutional Christianity. I mean, there's less connection with institutions generally. These youngsters are not joining political parties, but actually they're more politically engaged than ever. And they're not joining service organizations like a Rotary Club or an Apex Club, but they're into service and volunteering. In fact, the rate of Australian young adults volunteering is higher than the older adult population. It's just they're not doing it week by week in an institutional volunteer sense, but more an ad hoc sense. And I think it's true when it comes to seeking spiritual meaning as well. And so, if we're not hung up on the institution of church, if we're not hung up around religion, but we do want to engage with young people as they discuss the issues and search the issues of spirituality, this is the generation, because they're asking those questions. They're looking for meaning. They are the most materially endowed generation in history. They've been given more technology than ever before. They're more formally educated than any generation that has gone before them. And yet, what do we see? Mental health issues higher than ever, uncertainty, anxiety, self-harm, real challenges around their well-being. And so it tells me that all of the education and the material endowment and the technology is not bringing about a solution. All of the scientific discoveries and the intelligence we have, the research, is not transforming them. And of course, we would know it's the issues of faith and true meaning that is going to give them some direction. So I would say to those that are leaders in a church or youth pastor sense, engage with this generation. They're probably not going to rock up to church on a Sunday morning, and Friday night youth is not at the top of their go-to list, but we can connect with them. And if we do and have that collaborative engagement, we will find a generation that is searching and looking for real meaning and for truth and for reality. We surveyed Generation Z and we asked them, what are the biggest fears of your life? These are those in their late teens, early 20s. And the first two were issues around not being able to own my own home one day, not being able to earn enough, understandably, as they move into employment. But the other three really interest me. The other three of the top 5 fears: not finding fulfillment in life, not making a difference with my life, and not reaching my full potential.
Wow.
And so here we've got a generation looking for purpose, fulfillment, meaning, making a difference. And that's finding the reason they were created. And that's finding the purpose that God has for them. So what an opportunity to have these deep conversations with a generation that have looked for meaning, hasn't found it, and want to engage in the things of faith and spiritual meaning.
Yeah, I love that, Mark. You have hit something that resonates with me as a church leader and somebody that helps to serve the church at large in Australia and New Zealand, because what you're talking about is the message hasn't changed, doesn't honestly need to change, but the method of how we engage with them needs to change so that we're actually connecting with them. And I actually am convinced that technology can play a huge part in making that happen. And I'm thankful that I get to be a part of and serve with a network of churches in Australia and New Zealand that want to do things differently when it comes to the method, but not necessarily, change the message. And I'm glad that the hearts of this generation, it sounds like, are wide open to this message of meaning and purpose and fulfillment. We just need to figure out the methods of how to connect that to them. I love that. So talk to me about this. You said in your book, and I've heard this, I've probably been guilty of saying this, so I'll just go ahead and say I maybe have said this in the past. Almost every generation thinks that the best days are behind us. We talk about the good old days all the time. It seems that the challenges that are facing humanity today, that many parents and leaders of Generation Alpha are very concerned with the world that is shaping this generation. Would you guys give us some hope? What are the things that we should be focused on for the future that are hopeful about this generation and the world that they're going into?
Yeah, I think there's so many great things that we try to instill in the book. And we did find that as well in parents that we spoke to, that there is a little bit of, oh, I wouldn't want to be a kid growing up today. But when we spoke to Gen Alpha and even Gen Z, they said, this is a great time to be alive. And I think we want to, not skate over the challenges that this generation are going to face. In the book, we talk about those, but we also talk about the future, and that we believe the future is bright, that they will have access to more information or have more access and better healthcare and technology to enable them to lead different lives to how we did in the past. Even the time it's taken for the COVID vaccine compared to what it would have taken all those years ago. And I think about even technology, of course, there's some challenges, but how much it enabled us last year to connect, to actually do our work, to do church online. My 7-year-old nephew Noah was the one to contact me and say, Auntie Ashley, can we FaceTime so I can tell you about what's been happening at school? And I thought I was rebuked almost. I was like, my 7-year-old nephew's the one reaching out to me to connect on technology. And I think there's some really great things that we'll see in the future for this generation. And I know, Mark, you really believe this as well. And we were talking about this and you had some great thoughts as well from this particular perspective that we have around the hope we have for them.
Yeah, definitely. It's an era where we do listen to the voice more of young people, where they are more empowered, where they are part of the conversation, where leadership isn't just top down and autocratic, but it's participative. And we value that diversity in our leadership and in our teams. And so what an opportunity for this generation to share their perspectives and their digital skills and their understanding of the 21st century, their connection with peers better than we have. But at the same time, the leaders of today can share their experience and structured thinking and perhaps the knowledge that they have gained over going around the block a few more times. And I think together, we're seeing more of this intergenerational connection, less of this generational warfare. And I think it's a great time in that perspective, and a great opportunity for young people to really be involved in this and to be mentored, to be given these leadership opportunities to help shape their society. So that's part of the purpose of the book, to give voice to the young people and share a little bit about what's shaping them.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the big themes, and we'll wrap up with this question, of one of the big themes of the podcast is this idea of soul care. So yes, we want leaders to reach their goals, but we want them to do it without losing their soul. And there's not a week that goes by that I don't hear of a leader somewhere in the world that has literally gained the whole world. We just heard of one this week. I'm not going to mention their name, but they gained their whole world, but they lost their family in the midst of all of that. And so help us understand, when we talk about soul care here on the podcast, we talk about it in these terms, or we define it this way, that it's caring for or tending for the garden of your inner life, and kind of that emotional, mental health and that well-being side of things. How can we best care for the souls of Generation Alpha, in your opinion? What's the thing as leaders we can do to care for their souls?
I think for me, and part of the reason why we wrote the book was to help parents and leaders and educators feel seen, and to describe the world and go, it's changing. Let's look at the ways it's changing now. That's going to impact the future for this generation. There's some challenges there, but I think what I kept coming back to when we wrote the book was the fact that there are timeless human needs that exist in all of us, even though the context is changing. And those intrinsic human needs, like feeling like you belong and are accepted and that you've got intrinsic worth. And I think for us as Christians, or for anyone who has faith or spirituality, that's kind of embedded in the message that we receive from the people that we love in that community. But for many other people, they're looking for that in different spaces. And I think what we wanted to communicate is a lot of those elements come from being in community, come from, like we talked about, time away from screens, exploring human connection and wrestling with those bigger questions. And for us, it's all about, I guess, knowing that these kids are worthy of love and belonging because they're precious, because they're made in the image of God. And that's really, I guess, what we believe. And we try to sort of let that underpin all of the book, but really to, make sure that we keep all of that in mind as we do care for and lead and parent this next generation through changing times, remembering that they're humans first, they're made in the image of God first. Yes, everything else is changing around them, but that actually doesn't change. And that's, I think, really key for us to focus on when we think about caring for the souls of these precious little generation alphas who are growing up in very different times to maybe the times that we grew up in.
I love that. Mark, if somebody's listening to this and you were like, hey, here's what I would want to say about that soul care piece with the Generation Alpha, or even just your heart behind the book, what would you say to the listener in that regard?
Well, even to discuss the issue of soul is important. This generation are being well equipped to grow up physically healthy in terms of the food they eat and the exercise that we discuss. Mental health is strongly on the radar, as it should be. Academic growth, because they're in schooling, that's important. We're discussing relational development, essential. But not many people are talking about the spiritual side of their existence, and yet, of course, they have a soul, and that is so important. And we have so many opportunities for this generation, but how sad to have unlimited opportunities, but no purpose, no direction, and no real sense of meaning. And so we have to have those conversations with Generation Alpha and about Generation Alpha. And one thing I think we haven't served them well in is that we have, in a sense, empowered them. We've encouraged them. We've perhaps maybe made them the center of the world of the family, maybe the center of the world of society. But when we see that egocentricity writ large in someone out there, in a leader, in a celebrity, it looks pretty ugly. We don't like it. And we're in danger of creating that en masse across our society. What we need to equip this generation with is a knowledge of the other and around service, to have those global eyes on not just their circumstances, but that of others. Because as we serve, as we reach out, as we consider others, not just ourselves, I think we start to find greater purpose and meaning, start to make greater contributions, and recognize it's not just about my pathway, but considering others. And most importantly, in that priority, considering God's purpose for my life, not just mine. And as we get the young people to think about the broader perspective, where they sit, the opportunities that they can have as they live out their purpose, their designed purpose, I think that's where some big impacts of this next generation will be. And I do believe they'll shape the future. They'll have some mighty impacts in years to come.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you guys have been both so incredibly generous with your time on the podcast today. And I just want to say, personally, I'm so grateful for your time. Thanks for investing in the leaders that are listening to the podcast around the world. Thank you, guys. And I would love to know if somebody wanted to learn more about the book, get access to it, or even about McCrindle, your research firm. Tell us how to connect with you. Where do we get the copy? Where would you prefer that people get the copy of the book from?
Well, the title's called Generation Alpha, and that's the website as well, generationalpha.com, where there's lots of free resources as well about this generation. You can order the book through there, or in any bookstores or online, as you said. But, to pick up some more content around Generation Alpha, just go to generationalpha.com.
Yeah, very cool. And then McCrindle Research in general, Ashley, and how to connect with you guys even online, you and Mark. I like to follow both of you on social media. How do we find you guys?
Yeah, we're on the socials, and our website, mccrindle.com.au, is, I guess, a fountain, we like to call it, of just our research. We try and make everything that we can publicly available to people. So yeah, I'd recommend people head there, follow us on the socials, and also our blog. We try and set our research free and write about the implications of it on there as well. So if people are interested in anything we've said today or want to investigate further, I'd encourage them mccrindle.com.au and on the socials.
Go grab your very own copy of Generation Alpha, Understanding Our Children and Helping Them Thrive. It's a fantastic read, not only filled with great content and research, but easy to consume as well. It's written in such a readable format. So highly recommend it to people that are listening to the podcast. Thank you both for joining me for this conversation.
Thanks, Perko. It's been a delight.